Ever struggled with texturing your 3D models? Well, today I've got for you a beginner's guide to UV unwrapping in Blender. In this video, we'll cover the basics of UV coordinates, why UVs are essential, and how to use them to apply seamless textures to your meshes. This is the first of many UV videos that I'll be doing here, so if you're not already, make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep up with future tutorials so you can become a UV master. If you like the video, you can show your support by hitting the thumbs up, and without further ado, let's start the sim. To get started, let's talk about UV coordinates to give you some basic understanding of what we're about to do. These are the guidelines that Blender and other 3D softwares use to understand how to wrap a texture around your object. You can think of them sort of like the instructions on how to place a sticker on a complex shape without wrinkles or misalignment. Imagine you have a cardboard box and you want to place a single piece of textured or patterned paper onto it perfectly. First, you need to cut and unfold it into a 2D shape so that you can lay it out and decide how to place your paper or texture to fit. This is exactly what we're doing when we unwrap UVs in Blender. When we mark seams, which I'll explain more, you're essentially marking exactly where you want to cut to unfold your shape into something flat, which makes applying textures easiest and most accurate for your specific mesh. We're going to start with a default cube first. As a default shape, it's already unwrapped perfectly, but what exactly is the UV doing to cut the shape open like this? Let's add some seams to get a good look. First, let's open the top of the box by making seams along 3 sides and making that last unselected side up top basically a hinge where we can open the lid. You can select multiple edges at once by holding Shift while you make your selections. Let's do the same thing on the bottom, leaving us with 2 open ends and a square loop of faces in the middle. All that's left is to open up that loop with a single seam down one edge. Now switch from Edge Select to Face Select, and select all by pressing the A key. Then come up to the UV menu, hit Unwrap, and you'll see we get the same unwrapped shape we started with. Pretty easy. Next we'll move to a cylinder, which is a bit more complex, but still pretty simple. It's essentially 3 shapes put together, the tube and the end caps. So we'll place our first 2 seams around the circular ends to split it into those 3 parts. If you want to select a whole loop at once, so you don't have to click every edge, just hold Alt and click one edge along the loop. Mark your seams, and that leaves us with 2 flat shapes and a tube. Imagine it as a paper towel tube. If you want to flatten it out, you just cut a straight line up the side. So we'll do our last seam the same way. Then switch to Face Select, select all with A, and unwrap. If you don't want to go up to the UV menu along the top every time, you can also access it with the U key on your keyboard. This unwrap results in a UV with 2 circles and a rectangle. All easy shapes to texture evenly without distortion or warping. Last for today, we'll look at unwrapping a cone. The default unwrap doesn't use any seams, so it just splits the circle on the bottom and kind of smashes the rest into a flat circle with the point at the center. You can see that it works, technically, but the squish caused by unwrapping that way translates to some warping in the texture that really doesn't look great. The easiest way to fix that is by adding a seam that cuts the cone open like a piece of paper. Visualizing your meshes as physical objects can really be useful for complex shapes, especially when it comes to deciding where to lay your seams. So when we unwrap it like this, we get more of a semicircle type of unwrap, and you can tell from looking at this UV that the proportions of these faces compared to the size of the bottom look a lot more correct already. Now let's drop on our texture, and you can see that the warping is pretty much non-existent at this point. Some common issues you'll find when UVing objects is being able to see the seams, which when we used the original unwrap on the cone we didn't have. You can sometimes manually adjust the island on your UV map to minimize the appearance of the seams, although sometimes that's not totally possible. So I suggest that until you get a little more experienced in more advanced UV techniques, try to place your seams in less conspicuous parts of your mesh, like the backside of the object that won't be seen by your camera in a render. This is something we'll cover more in future videos, so make sure you subscribe to the channel to get that info right here. I'll put a link in the corner of this video in the future, so if I've gotten to those advanced tutorials by the time you're watching this, there should be a direct link to content about how to work around UV seams to create a perfectly seamless texture. If you learned something today, don't forget to hit the thumbs up too. Do you have any specific UV questions you want us to answer in another video? Let me know down in the comments, and of course, as always, take care of yourself and each other.